Hello, and welcome back to the Gundam Retrospective. Yes, I know, I need to get another light. It looks pretty damn depressing in here right now. Today we are talking about Gundam Reconguista in G, one of the most unique, but also most uniquely confusing Gundam series. G-reco was conceived as a series celebration for Gundam's 35th anniversary, with the original creator coming back to the director's chair one more time. That's right, Tomino himself directed for his first time since 1999's Turn A. And while Turn A was one of my favorite Gundam series, I feel a lot more conflicted on Reconguista. It is fun to say, though, Reconguista. Also, I feel like I should point out that Tomino hasn't directed anything since then, at least for TV, and it's been almost 10 years, unless you count the compilation movies. So hey, maybe we'll get something good for the 45th anniversary, fingers crossed. Reconguista is a 26-episode series with character designs by Kenichi Yoshida, which gives the show a very distinct look. I am a fan of Yoshida's other mecha work on Eureka 7, and he definitely lends a very unique style to the series. The animation itself is very fluid, with a lot of attention paid to how characters move, both in and out of their combat mechs. To go with the beautiful animation is a thrilling soundtrack with a lot of energetic tunes. I noticed the use of a bunch of different instruments here as well, so I should not have been surprised to see that the composer is Yugo Kanno, the man behind JoJo's Bizarre Adventures soundtracks, starting with Part 3. He also worked on Pluto and all 3 seasons of Psycho Pass, so just a really strong offering in the audio department in this series for sure. Reconguista is known as a series that is kind of confusing to follow, and I have to say I agree. I'm going to do my best in this video to lay out the information about the world in a way that makes sense, because this series likes to keep information from the viewer for long periods of time. So let's go ahead and hunker down inside of a giant space elevator that is also the Vatican, because this is Gundam Reconguista in G. The Universal Century is old news, and really bad news as well. Welcome to the Reguild Century. For the past 1,000 years, humanity has rebuilt from the ashes. Unlike in Turn A, where the various Gundam timelines were all rolled into the dark history and hidden away, here people know of the UC and endeavor to learn from their past mistakes, in order to help people not stray from their path of technological rehabilitation. Humanity's most major power has imposed a set of taboos. This power is known as Su-Cordism, a holy church that takes up its main residence in a place called the Capitol Tower, the last remaining vestige of the Universal Century, a fully operational space elevator. Su-Cordism's full name is Space Umbilical Cordism, and basically they believe the Capitol Tower is the umbilical cord connecting humanity to space. They don't go into a ton of detail, but it is vague and mystical most of the time. Countries around the world abide by these taboo, namely not waging worldwide wars or advancing technology too fast in specific areas, because the Su-Cordis Church provides them with power in the form of photon batteries. Where does the church get these batteries? I don't know. Nobody does. God, I guess. No one seems to question it, and it seems to have worked out so far. Unfortunately, the two countries of Ameria and Gondwan have been in a 20-year-long intercontinental war. What are you gonna do? Which has prompted a disturbing movement within the Capitol Tower. While the tower has always been secured by an elite group known as the Capitol Guard, who rely on practical but fairly low-power mobile suits, a new group known as the Capitol Army has been christened. They pilot advanced mobile suits that border on breaking taboo, and the director of operations for the Capitol Tower, a woman named Wilmot Zenham, was kept in the dark about their formation. The director's son, a cadet about to graduate from the Guard Academy, is our main character named Bellary, and he's introduced as a good-natured, boisterous teen who's excited to protect his homeland of the Capital Territory. Bellary and his class ascend the Capitol Tower on a set of movable platforms called the Crown. We get a lot of technical explanation and world building here, and g-reco is fairly infamous for name-dropping a bunch of factions or terms without giving the audience any context. In this instance, the show actually goes into fairly good detail on how the tower works, with the elevator itself housing 144 stations, called nuts, and ending with a huge station known as Sanct Porto. Sanct Porto is known as a holy land for adherents to I almost said SU-cordism. See, Su-cordism is stupid. Su-cordism, as the place where the leaders of the church receive the photon batteries in some sort of ritual. And only high-ranking members of the church are allowed to go there. In fact, later we find out that the Pope himself only goes there about once a year. So it's really crazy when one day a girl known only as Rariah appears in orbit near the Capital Territory in a mysterious mobile suit known as the G-Self. She runs from the guard, even bailing from the mech in a wingsuit, but is ultimately captured. Unfortunately, the guard can't get any info out of her, as her exposure to the high altitude and loss of oxygen has basically wiped her memory and fried her brain. Bellary gets involved in a small scuffle when he's out doing zero-G mobile suit training. Some space pirates show up and spread Minovsky particles, the Gundam series explanation for why wireless communication is pretty much impossible during battle. One of the pirates is piloting the G-Self, but for some reason the suit refuses to fully react to her commands, resulting in her being captured by Bellary and his instructor Dellinson. The pirate is Ida, who is then taken prisoner by the Capitol Guard. The mobile suit won't react to anyone that tries to pilot it, except for Bellary. As he enters the cockpit, it responds by saying Ray Hunt in code. He's the only one who's able to power up the suit at all, and the cockpit spits out this gold data disk that looks like a bird with its wings folded. Remember this thing? It becomes kind of important later. We meet Bell's friend Lewin, who's in the guard with him, and his semi-love interest, Naredo Nug. One of the first things we'll notice with her is that people refer to her as Kuntala, which is a perfect example of this show's writing style. You can assume this word is like just a slur or a pejorative or something, but it actually refers to characters belonging to a caste of people known as Kuntala, who were, This is the craziest thing I've ever heard in a Gundam series, so buckle in. In the past, long ago, this cast of people were raised as cattle and eaten during a dark age between the UC and the Reguild Century. Yeah, that's pretty dark, and it's barely brought up within the series, but it is there to illustrate just how low humanity got until things eventually turned around. Don't ask me the logistics of that situation, though, because they say that once and, like, that's it. I don't know in what world it's more efficient to raise humans on a farm and eat them as opposed to like cows or chickens. I guess maybe if like all life on Earth was wiped out except for humans, but again, we don't have that info, so get here with the free range children.
Now to check on the free range children.
Now, I say this is a perfect example of this show's style because you don't actually learn that info until around episode 7 or 8, and you learn it in a side conversation that two characters happen to have. The show never really has expository dialogue unless it's for a character's convenience. There's no real audience insert character here who is unaware of this information, so there's no need for the characters to explain this stuff out loud. This isn't a horrible way to do things. In fact, piecing together bits of world building like that can be very rewarding. It's like the Dark Souls item descriptions of anime. However, when you layer this type of expository style on top of the fact that there are about 12 factions in this show with their own goals and beliefs, and the show is only 26 episodes long, well, can you say confusing clusterfuck? Bellry and his class attend some sort of formal reception, but during the party, the capital is bombarded by pirate mobile suits. The suits are led by a guy named Captain Kahil, and their goal is to free Ida from the prison tower. Bell, Naredo, and Raraya, who is now under Naredo's care for some reason, go to the tower. They grab Ida and meet with Lewin, who says that they should hide her from the pirates. Bell ends up having to get into the G-Self to move it from the hangar, and when Kahil tries to stop him, he gets shot point blank in the cockpit. Oopsie, it turns out that really pretty pirate girl you have a crush on was dating the man you just vaporized. Cue the arrival of Colonel Kumpa Rusida, the head of the Capital Army Research Division, and all-round super trustworthy guy who takes custody of Ida. We learn that Ida is part of a pirate crew that Rusida says is recognized by the American government, so basically a bunch of privateers. Before the colonel can ask why the G-Self only reacts to Bellry and Ida, a siren goes off signaling a new attack on the facility. This time, it's a pilot named Klim Nick and his mobile suit, the Montero. Klim is further proof that the pirates are American-backed, as he is the son of the American president, so, not exactly incognito. And he's known as a genius pilot and their armed forces. Dellinson fights Klim and does a pretty good job of fending him off, and when Bellry lets Ada get into the G-Self's cockpit with him, she takes the easiest escape opportunity possible and takes control of the mech. And Bellry seems shocked that she's escaping, and I don't really know why. Of course she's going to overpower you and take the mech. The show has this problem a few times where, a character will do something that's incredibly obvious that they're going to do, and everyone around will just stand around and be like, no, why are you doing that? Well, a character just does something, and it's the most obvious action anyone can take, but I'm getting ahead of myself. Also, this episode shows us that people like Ida and Bell are Su-Cordists, who are disgusted that Klim would fight near the Capitol Tower, which is a huge no-no in their religion. Klim is revealed to be pretty disdainful of the entire power structure of Su-Cordism. Later on, he never shies away from using their beliefs of the followers against them, like purposely fighting near sacred sites or using religious buildings as cover for his ships. This show allows characters who are on the same side to have their own beliefs that sometimes even butt heads, and that makes for some very deep character interaction, but at the same time it does make it confusing to keep track of how every character is going to react in every situation. A good thing to know about Reconguista is that every character is really out for their own interests, even within their own factions, and that sometimes means that characters appear to act against their own interests or in the interests of their allies because of their own beliefs. It sounds very good and deep from the outside looking in, but in the end I really felt like it made things incredibly complicated just because of the sheer volume of characters and factions. Ida takes the G-Self along with Bellry and Naredo to a hidden cove where the pirate ship named Megafauna awaits. We meet the members of the pirate crew, notably Captain Daniel, who has a really good design but kind of falls flat in this series. By the end, you basically know nothing about him. There's Steer, the ship's helmsman, who randomly yells in English, which was confusing at first when I thought I accidentally put on a dub that doesn't exist. And then there's Happa, the ship's mechanic, who's in charge of keeping their mobile suits up and running. Dellinson takes a squad to try and recover Bellry, and we see that the Capital Army has access to various new models of mobile suit throughout this opening arc. The Rec 10 is simple and looks like a toy, and is a good example of how the Capital views technological advancement as a violation of taboo. The Guard get these dinky, terrible grunt suits, and it's only when the army introduces their comparably powerful Cat She that things start to resemble Gundam. Bellry feels really bad for killing Ida's lover, so he goes out to fight the Capital Army and the G-Self. They are really trusting of him to let him do that, but I guess Bell doesn't know anything about the army, and he's suspicious enough to fight them off. Earlier, we saw that his mom didn't know anything about them either, so he has no real reason to trust them, even though they're like technically part of the same faction. We do see later that Bellry explains to Naredo that he wants to stay with the pirates to gather information to take back to his mother at the tower, but his motivations can be really foggy before he finally explains that. Along with explaining motivations, I really wish that a little bit of explanation went into what the G-Self is actually capable of. There's a moment here where Bellry fights Dellinson, who doesn't know that his student is piloting the Gundam, and Bellry yells, "Sue Cord," and then shoots this weird energy attack. Later on, the G-Self will pull off beam shields, unicorn-style self-projection, and after-image bullshit. A whole litany of other crazy attacks that don't even have names, let alone an explanation on how they work. We find that the pirates don't know anything about the G-Self, as they only picked it up after Rariah abandoned it in atmosphere. Super lucky that Ida can pilot it, huh? We also learn that these pirates aren't really pirates, they're essentially an autonomous unit of Amerian soldiers that can be written off as expendable if need be. The Megafauna itself is an incredibly advanced ship that was built using something called the Rose of Hermes blueprints, a set of super advanced mechanical designs from the UC era that have somehow been leaked to the various factions on Earth. The Megafauna is like a super duper taboo breaking spaceship, hence the pirate cover up so that the Capitol Guard doesn't cut off Ameria's energy supply. Which, by the way, is the first thing Bell's mom threatens to do after he's been kidnapped. "Kidnap my son, will you? How about you dirty heathens get no electricity for a year?" And she's kind of a hardcore bitch, damn. At the end of this episode, as they've fought off Dellinson and killed all his men, we get an ominous warning from Klim. He says that something important and dangerous is heading to Earth from space, and that is the reason the Capital Army was formed. We also hear of a place called Toa Sanga for the first time, and it is apparently a holy land for the Sioux Cordists and the location where they receive photon batteries. Rariah perks up at the mention of Toa Sanga, so the gang surmises that she must be from there, which is as much information as they can get out of her because her mental state fluctuates between 6-year-old and vegetable. The G-Self appears to have been made in Toa Sanga as its technology eclipses anything else besides the Megafauna itself. Bellry's friend and classmate Lewin shows up in the newly constructed and terribly named mobile suit, the Elf Bullock. He's given a mask by Rusita that is explained as some sort of Google Glass heads-up display. It really has no justification beyond the fact that this is a Gundam show and they needed a guy in a mask. I mean, after this point, he even goes by the name Mask for some reason. I guess Lewin wants to completely give himself over to his goal of furthering the standing of the Kuntala in society, but it's really just a little melodramatic. He doesn't have a reason to hide his identity, and it becomes a little strange when Manny is looking for him throughout the series and he just won't tell her who he is for literally no reason. Also, as far as the Kuntala go, you cannot tell who is one just by looking at them. It's a class thing and not a race thing, but boy, it does get confusing until they finally explain it very briefly in episode 10. After the battle with Mask, the Megafauna heads into space for literally just one episode, and then goes right back to their little island hideout. While they were up there, Bellry gets into a fight with Dellinson again and accidentally kills him. Second time Bell has murked a guy by firing a beam directly into the cockpit. In the next episode, the Mask Corps attacks them, and Bell has to save Ida after her mobile suit falls into the ocean. It's kind of a shame that Ida kinda sucks for the majority of this show. She barely gets a chance to use the G-Arcane for anything other than standing on the Megafauna deck with a rifle, and the Arcane is a great design, definitely underutilized. As the battle rages on, we're introduced to an incredibly important character that arrives with Amerian reinforcements. Inspector General Gusian Suragon is the head of the Amerian army and Ida's father. When Belle's mom, Wilmot, steals a glider from the Capitol Tower and arrives on the island, we realize that they know each other from an international conference. Some world building about the way that the distribution of energy works is fairly interesting, but it brings up the point that no one knows where the photon batteries really come from. A lot of people just chalk it up to God. I mean, Wilmot is the operations director of the whole tower, and she doesn't know the origin of the power source for all life on Earth, so Wilmot is shown pictures that were taken by Ameria that show the presence of some sort of facility on the moon. This is pretty shocking to everyone because nobody should have the tech to live up there. It would break the taboo like super duper hard. Gusion and by extension Ameria's position is that they need UC era tech to defend the Earth from whatever this is. Just assuming it's a threat, eh? Guess your soul is weighted down by gravity, Inspector General Surrigan. Bellry immediately wants the Capitol Tower and Guard to work together with Ameria to defend Earth from the threat from space. Wilmot seems to be having a crisis of faith, saying that the Pope has never mentioned anyone living in space, and I wish this show went more into detail with people's faith and beliefs, because what we do get of it is really interesting. When members of the Guard finally come to meet the megafauna under Wilmot's direction, we get to meet Lieutenant Kerbes, an experienced member of the Guard who is quickly ingratiated into the megafauna's pilot cabal. That's another weird thing with this show. Characters are allowed to do things on the megafauna when in any other show they would be confined as prisoners. Either way, Kerbes essentially becomes part of the crew from here on out, and while he never officially gives up his position from within the Guard itself kind of fades into the background over time as the larger factions come into play. The megafauna heads south and hides in an old hangar in the jungle. Bellry, along with his mom and Gusion, go to the tower and confront the Pope about the moon people, and that, I just realized how crazy of a sentence that is. Gusion points out to the Pope that the teachings of the Church say nothing about the tower linking the Earth to people living in space, and the Pope gives a pretty non-committal answer that boils down to, what, did you think the photon batteries were created by magic? Like, yeah, kinda. I mean, the Church guards the secret origin of the batteries so closely that the operations director of the tower doesn't know it, so what are people supposed to think? In the middle of the meeting, Kerbes comes in and spirits Belle and Ida away. It seems that the army wants to take custody of Belle, and the megafauna has decided to head to space to escape. Again, this is another thing that this show loves to do. The characters will spend multiple episodes or battles trying to get somewhere, and then they have one conversation and immediately leave. The ship narrowly escapes the Capitol Army and makes it into space. Gusion is too important of a character to add to the megafauna crew, so he actually stays at the tower and then takes a glider just like Wilmot, landing back in Ameria. While the megafauna thinks they're safe, the Capitol Army's warship, the Garandon, is revealed to be space capable and follows them. And then we also get the news that Ameria is launching its space fleet, including a ship called the Salamandra under Klim's command. Everyone thinks that that's probably bad. Ameria still wants to occupy the tower, and Klim is known as a genius for a reason. If they can take the tower from the Capitol Guard and the relatively untrained Capitol Army, then they can actually seize the means of power production for the entire Earth, so that would put the cap on the whole 20-year international war that they've been having. We do get a very sleek design in the specialized Mac knife, a suit that Mask and his new subordinate Barara pilot. She doesn't get much development beyond having a thing for her commander, and also her normal suit has a rabbit theme, and I think that's neat. Speaking of Mask, he really has become a huge dick since joining the army. Lewin seemed to be a pretty good friend with Belle back in episode 1, but almost halfway through the series and all he can think about is defeating him in battle. Hell, once he finds out that Bellry is the one who's piloting the G-Self, he never once thinks of why that might be, he just considers him an enemy immediately. The Amerians want to use a ship called the Gavael as a decoy to enter Sankt Porto and capture it. They cite that the Sucordis have a thing about giving help and taking in ships in their scripture, and the Gaviel and Salamandra make it inside the Space Vatican, but the Megafauna has no such luck. For some reason, they keep saying that they can't get in with a ship or mobile suit, so they have to go down to the last nut of the tower and then get in through the elevator, but then the guard won't let them take the elevator, so they just fly up in the Arcane and G-Self and enter through a hangar anyway. I don't know, this whole plot point felt like it was only to keep the main characters out of the action for a whole episode. Inside Sanct Porto is basically a space colony with rolling green hills and a holographic blue sky. Klim reveals that the people that live at Toasanga, the place where photon batteries originate, are actually survivors from the UC era who started something called the Hermes Foundation. Basically think Illuminati but science-based, and also probably the place where the Rose of Hermes blueprints that all these taboo-breaking ships and suits are based originate from. All of the Amerian forces believe the mystery space dwellers probably don't have their best interests at heart and want the church to spill the beans on their existence and possibly have them help fight them off. Well, the church doesn't really have to explain anything because the Gaviel ascends above Sanct Porto, which in itself is a taboo and is immediately blown up. This reveals the existence of a space-noid fleet between them and the moon, and that the Holy Land of Toasanga is actually a surviving space colony beyond the moon. This reveal is enough to make the Capital Army contact Gusion and suggest a truce between the Garandon's troops and the ones of the Megafauna and Salamandra. They figure that if they take out the main command ship, the rest of the moon fleet will scatter, as they're inexperienced soldiers who don't know war. Unfortunately, Klim's plan to fake a surrender and then attack the ship doesn't pan out, as the fleet just fires at them anyway, forcing Bell to defend the mobile suit group with the G-Self's barrier. With that plan having failed, the leader of the moon fleet, a man named General Noto Duret, heads to Sanct Porto to meet the Pope. Rariah seems to have some recollection of his name, which is the first time that she has had any memory recovery at all. I haven't talked about Rariah much because that's basically, until now, she mostly runs around like a carefree child talking to her goldfish. But now when they arrive at Sanct Porto, she faints, and when she awakens, she has all of her memories back. Of course, the show literally doesn't mention it for an entire episode, just having Rariah talking normally all of a sudden. But then at the end, Bellry is like, oh, whoa, Rariah's talking and has her memories? It's not like he isn't around her for the episode either. He's in the first scene with her where she's explaining who Duret is. This actually kind of irked me, honestly. It makes Belle come off as really self-absorbed, and for such a big character turn, it makes you feel like the show is fucking with you for an entire episode before it finally tells you her backstory. So, now, we finally get the true reveal behind the world of Reconguista in G. The rumors that our heroes have been hearing are true. The photon batteries are not a product of faith or a divine boon, but a product of an advanced race of humans that currently live in the space colony known as Toasanga. The strongest family of these space noids are the Durets, who command the Duret fleet and say that they have been forced to show themselves since Ameria brought a fleet to space, and they can no longer hide their people behind the moon. Within the political structure of the space noids is a philosophical idea known as the Reconguista. Basically, it's the ultimate plan to recolonize the Earth after it's been healed from the many wars it's suffered throughout its history. And a quick piece of trivia, the word Reconguista comes from the Spanish word Reconquista, which literally just refers to reconquering previously colonized territories. I think there was like an old interview with Tomino where he said like he liked the word and then put a G in there because people thought it sounded better. So there you go, Reconguista. The Durets were not the only powerful family within the Space Noid people. Their adversaries in power were the Rayhuntans, a family and their followers that refused the idea of the Reconguista. In fact, the Rayhuntans didn't even like the thought of giving Earthlings photon batteries in the first place. They didn't want to prop up the Succordis Church or have Earth rely on their energy production. They simply wanted to let both groups grow separately, but it seems that even thousands of years away from Earth doesn't diminish a soul's need for gravity, so fighting broke out between the two factions, with the Durettes ultimately coming out on top, leaving only a small resistance to oppose them on Toasanga. Raraya was a member of the Toasangan resistance and was sent to Earth to find surviving members of the Rayhuntan faction that fled during the fighting, under the guise of scouting for the start of the Reconguista, which is why she can also pilot the G-Self along with Bellry and Ida. But why can Bellry and Ida pilot the G-Self? Why would the Rayhuntan Code recognize them? Bellry wants to know just what all the fighting is about, and Ida has a deep yearning to know the truth behind the world. In fact, there's a scene where she defends Ameria's actions later on and says that they had to break taboo to defend themselves, and is told that that's just what she's been told, not what she knows, which sways her into wanting to seek the truth behind photon power, but it's also kind of annoying. I would understand if Ida was some sheltered Gundam princess, but she is a soldier and a space pirate, and she's seen hardship. You don't get to tell her if her lived experience is valid or not, but hey, this show needs her motivations to change, so there we go. So because of all this, Ida and Bell want to go to Toasanga to learn the truth. At this point, the megafauna just does whatever they want. I guess there is some justification because Gusion also wants to know. Klim overhears that Mask and Rusita want to try to assassinate Durette, but not in Sanct Porto because killing a guy in the world's biggest church would probably not be good for the capital army's image, so they decide to attack his ship. Klim uses this opportunity for the Salamandra and Megafauna to slip past the Dorette fleet and make it to the moon. Oh, and Mask doesn't actually get to assassinate him either, he just shoots a tube at the ship that has a message saying that they'll be welcome on Earth if they surrender, which the Durettes don't really care about at the moment. The Megafauna and Salamandra approach Toasanga, and at some point in the battle they took a Durette fleet pilot named Ringo prisoner, but he's cool and he likes them, so he just immediately becomes part of the crew. No joke, he starts piloting a mobile suit for the Megafauna like 2 episodes after he's taken prisoner, mostly because he just immediately falls in love with Raraya, and that is his whole character. He tells them of an old unused dock that they can just enter at the station, and when they finally enter Toasanga, Bellry and Ida meet with 3 members of the Rayhuntan resistance. First is Flaminia, who Raraya knows, and welcomes them to the station. Unfortunately, this is basically it for the resistance. Any other members are just unnamed and hanging out in the background. Miraji and his men immediately refer to Bell and Ida as Prince and Princess, revealing that the 2 main characters are actually siblings. They even find a picture of their parents, and it seems that they were sent to Earth as children to protect them from the Durettes. Along with them being hidden on the planet, the Rayhuntan Code was secretly implanted by Rayhuntan spies into the operating system of the G-Self, ensuring that the mech would only operate and protect its chosen pilots. We also learned that Toasanga isn't even the top of the food chain when it comes to the space noids. The true power of the photon batteries is produced at a location known only as the Venus Globe, a set of colonies in the general vicinity of Venus. The batteries are brought from the Venus Globe to Toasanga on a giant transport ship called the Crescent Ship. So Ida decides she wants to somehow board that ship and then go all the way to really find out the truth. Meanwhile, Bell has been a little moody. You know, he's been crushing on Ida since the start of the show, and she ends up being his sister, so that kind of sucks. It's a real Luke Skywalker situation there. And now these guys are calling him a prince and assuming he'll just automatically be on their side when he didn't even know anything about them like a few hours ago. Bellry actually ends up getting really pissed off, deciding to follow Ida just to see what everyone is fighting about and really to just make a decision for himself for once. The megafauna decides it can probably just dock with the Crescent ship and they'll figure it out from there. This happens a lot in g-reco. The characters come up with a bare bones plan and just let fate fill in the blanks. To their credit, it works basically every time. At this point, there are 2 or 3 factions within the Direct fleet, all vying to capture the G-Self to gain prestige. Plus, the Capital Army wants it because Reseda believes it could be a good bargaining chip for negotiating with the Directs. Basically, we kick off the final stretch of the show with every faction wanting the G-Self all of a sudden, when before they didn't really care about it. Even Klim, who has up to this point been a fairly stalwart ally of Bellry and Ida, shows his true colors, wanting Bell on his side to gain power within the Amerian government, even suggesting he might coup his own dad. Oh, by the way, the president of Ameria is named President Zucchini Nacini, which is equal parts ridiculous and amazing. So the megafauna uses Bellry and the G-Self as a distraction, flying right up inside the arms of the Crescent ship and docking. Bellry enters the Crescent ship and finds this big weird terminal that activates the ray hunting code just like the first time he entered the G-Self. The patterns on the room's structure match he and Ida's pendants, and after reacting with it, the ship starts its engines way ahead of schedule and starts its way to Venus. Now, all of this is gobbledygook, and later we're told it's actually the ship interacting with the G-Self somehow, and that makes it go to Venus way faster than intended. It's a somehow Palpatine returned level explanation that didn't even really need to be there. On the Crescent ship, we find out that Flaminia, the woman who greeted our heroes at Toasaga, is actually a double agent and the ship's doctor for the Crescent ship. Now, Flaminia is a pretty unimportant character in the long run, but I wanted to call this out specifically because it turns out she's actually a triple agent for another faction later, and I just find that ridiculous. Anyway, the crew of the Crescent ship is part of the Hermes Foundation, which has control of the Venus globe, and they just decide to go along with the megafauna's plan. We finally see that the globe itself is a giant ring of stations with the colony in the middle. The Hermes Foundation plans on filling the entire globe with photon batteries, enough to power humanity for the rest of time. Of course, we couldn't make it to a new location without a new faction trying to take control of the megafauna and G-Self. This time it's a bunch of pilots from a space called the JIT Labs, which is spelled G-IT, but it's definitely pronounced JIT, I'm not making that one up. Which happens to be where the G-Self and the other G-Series suits were created. Led by a guy named Captain Kia, these goofballs want to take the G-Self in order to carry out the Reconguista, but it's like a different Reconguista than the one the Directs want to do. It's not super important, just know they're their own faction. Flaminia tries to steal the G-Self because, like I said, she is a triple agent, actually working for the JIT Labs, but she's really stupid and doesn't know that she can't move it. Bellry tries to stop her, but she injects him with sedative and knocks him out and then escapes. Opposing the JIT Labs is the Venus Globe's ruling class that live on a station known as Rosario 10. Ida wants to meet with the leader of Venus Globe, a man named Lagu, but they are having trouble even getting close to the station, as the JIT Labs suits have taken over the Crescent ship. The crew comes up with a plan, sending out the mobile suits to fight while the megafauna heads to Rosario 10. During the fight with Kia, Bell realizes that if they fight close enough to the Venus Globe, the JIT Lab suits won't use beams. Kia keeps telling everyone it's taboo to use powerful weaponry near the globe, which I thought was weird because there's no reason for the Space Noids to have to abide by Su-Cordism taboos. Like, they can't be Su-Cordists themselves because they know the church is a facade for the surviving Space Noids. Despite Kia being the one shouting about taboo, he is the one that just opens fire on his suit's giant beam weapons and blows a fucking hole right through the big globe. Seawater starts spilling out into space, but before it's able to freeze over, Bellry and Kia fly up through it, revealing that the ocean globe contains, you guessed it, an ocean. But now the entire thing is draining because Kia is a big dumb idiot, so he nobly sacrifices himself by getting in a big mobile armor and plugging the hole with its frame. Unfortunately, he's crushed to death by the water pressure, as all these JitLab suits are specifically designed to handle space. The Megafauna uses all of the confusion to head for Rosario 10, and I should also mention that this entire time there's been another minor faction introduced called the 10 Police, who escort the Megafauna and attempt to gain control of the situation. And I should also mention that this entire time there's been another minor faction introduced called the 10 Police, who escort the Megafauna and attempt to gain control of the situation. Finally, our heroes are back together and relatively safe at Rosario 10. They meet the leader of Venus Globe, a regally dressed man named Lagoo, who tells them the truth behind the Venus Globe people, I guess. So Colonel Rusita is actually a man named Piani Kaluta, who hails from the Venus Globe, but close to 20 years ago, he rebelled and left for Earth. He wished to push the Earthlings into conflict so that their tech would advance and the idea of the Reconguista would become more and more attractive as the Earthlings neared space travel. Oh, he's also the one that took Ida and Bellry to Earth in the first place, because why not? I should also mention that Bell being adopted by the operations director of the tower and Ida being adopted by the Amerian military leader wasn't a part of the plan, and that was coincidence because Rusita didn't know that they were the children from the beginning, which is actually a fucking crazy coincidence if you stop to think about it. So why did Rusita snap and head to Earth to foment conflict? Lagoo says it's because he lost faith in humanity because those who live in space start to mutate. He reveals that he is nearly 200 years old, but tells Ida that it's because of something called a bodysuit, and when she sees it, hoo boy, she's gonna lose faith in all humanity. And then he reveals that he's like a little shriveled corpse man kept alive by machinery under his wig and makeup. Yeah, I mean, he looks gross, but I don't know why Ida would be so shaken by this that it would make her lose faith in the human race. Either way, Rusita hated this so much that he fled to Earth, and that's what started this entire conflict. Now that Ida knows the truth behind the Venus Globe, the whole crew decides to leave, but of course the JitLabs reveal they have a ship called the Full Moon Ship, and they're going first. The Full Moon Ship is basically like the Crescent Moon Ship, but on steroids, and it's real big and impressive. They plan on arriving in the Earth sphere to carry out the Reconguista before anyone can stop their ultra-awesome Venus tech. The Megafauna's mobile suits are all kitted out with new tech from Rosario 10, as well as the G-Self getting something called the Perfect Backpack. Bell literally says fuck the manual, he can learn to pilot it better on the fly, which cements Bell in place as the most Mary Sue of all the Tomino Gundam characters. Like, yeah, most of the time they get super new type powers, but here Bellry is just better than everyone at everything all the time anyway. I can't think of a single fight he has in the show up until this point where there's been any threat that he or the G-Self might lose, and I think that takes a lot of wind out of the show's sails because the threat never seems real once you realize this. The Megafauna crew also obtained some new suits at Rosario 10, namely the G-Lucifer, which is really cool looking and is piloted by Naredo and Raraya, and the G-Rack, which they let Manny pilot for some reason, despite her still being a prisoner. So what do you know, the second they arrive back in the Earth sphere, Manny steals the G-Rack and goes back to Mask, and everyone is like, oh no, why would Manny do that? I thought she was our friend. Maybe because she's still loyal to the army? It seems pretty easy to figure out. Bellry and the others do try to talk some sense into Wilmot and explain that the entire war that has been going on for 20 years is because of Rusita, but he's standing right there and just talks over them. And he says that while they were gone, the Space Pope was taken hostage by the Dorette fleet aboard the Mikoshi, and then Mask infiltrated it in a really cool mission that we didn't get to see and is already resolved. I know they say show don't tell, but this is kind of ridiculous. The army guys tell Ida she's being taken prisoner as a useful Amerian hostage, but then they literally just walk out of the room when Reseda turns around, so I guess they didn't want her as a hostage that bad. Gusion offers for Bellry and Ida, along with the other G-series pilots, to become part of the Amerian fleet, but they all agree that they want to stay aboard the Megafauna as an independent unit. Apparently they brought some representatives from Rosario 10 back so that they could experience the horrors of war, and Bellry now has the goal of going after the root cause of the entire conflict. Before I forget, Bell fights a guy from the Dorette fleet named Rock Pie, and when he kills him, Bell says he could feel cold, and we get some new type weirdness, but that is all of the new type stuff that there is in the show. It's so minimal that it's basically just an Easter egg. The JIT Labs people make their move by using this space laser called the Yggdrasil. After everything, it seems that the people at the JIT Labs crew were loyal to the army, mostly because of Reseda, and they also follow the ideals of their deceased Captain Kia. In fact, they go on about Captain Kia so much, they actually might talk about him for more of the runtime of the show than he's actually on it. So now Mask and them are teamed up, and that means that Barara has assumed the role of piloting Yggdrasil, which is pretty much just a pyramid that shoots a giant beam. The Amerian and Dorette fleet look like they're finally about to duke it out when they get totally third-partied by Barara. This attack is one of the most devastating attacks on a fleet in Gundam too, because not only does the giant tree laser kill General Dorette and destroy his entire fleet, it also kills Gusion and pretty much wipes out Ameria's fleet as well. And then it takes the combined effort of the G-Self, G-Lucifer, G-Arcane, and like a bunch of other suits to get close enough to destroy the Yggdrasil. And overall, a pretty good fight, and one that you would think would wrap up the series, what with most of the antagonistic forces being blown up or sucked out into space. Also, like, Gusion gets killed directly in front of Ida too. Like, she watches him get vacuumed from the bridge, so that sucks for her. After this, Ida is given command of the Megafauna by Captain Danielle, as she could have great influence as the daughter of the Inspector General. At first, Ida doesn't believe that she can do it, and it's been her character arc to discount herself through this entire show, but she begrudgingly agrees. Even though both fleets are decimated, Bellry is being harassed by Mask and Manny while going through atmospheric re-entry. At this point, Mask is completely crazed, shouting that Bellry has the blood of a dictator in his veins, and Mask wants to elevate the Kuntala, but also when he finds out that Bellry is a Ray Huntin', he becomes 100% sure that Bellry will become a dictator. I think this part of Mask's character is really dumb. It comes out of nowhere, and Lewin really has turned into a giant loser with no redeeming qualities besides his design. That's what happens when the only win this guy gets in the entire series happens off screen. Even when Bell makes it through the atmosphere and down to Earth, Mask won't leave him alone. Good thing his mobile suit is so cool and has 4 beam sabers. Oh, also the G-Rack that Manny is piloting has a beam... centipede? Yeah, I got no clue on that one, but it is creative. The Megafauna sees that Ameria actually has a second secret fleet built by Gusion without anyone's knowledge, and they're heading to take over the capital tower. Kinda back to square one with this show, huh? Raraya and Naredo go in the G-Lucifer and destroy the main Amerian ship with what appears to be the Moonlight Butterfly from Turn A. They don't even mention what this is, so I would assume this is also just an Easter egg. Speaking of Easter eggs, Bell is chased through the forest by Mask, eventually finding some old ruins and hiding inside. We see a bunch of old mobile suit models decaying in the structure and realize that it's probably Jaburo from the original series and its sequels. Another cool Easter egg that leads to the final confrontation between Bellry and Mask. They fight until both mobile suits are heavily damaged, and Bell ejects in the core fighter to survive, but Mask's mobile suit is also disabled, so it's a draw. Ida finally mans up and announces to the fleet that she is Inspector General Surrigan's daughter, and they need to stand down and stop trying to take over the Capitol Tower, and they just sort of go, okay, well that sounds good then, and the conflict comes to an end. Finally, Reseda is dealt with in possibly the dumbest way possible. After being the villain and literally pulling the strings behind every event in the series somehow, he and Wilmot go to Earth in a glider, and then he stands too close to the battle and is knocked off a cliff by a mobile suit and dies. What a way to go. Sometime later, we see that pretty much everyone who wanted to forcibly carry out the Reconguista is dead, and the world has pretty much gone back to the status quo. I'm assuming that people know the church is a bunch of bullshit, but they still exist and are in power, so yeah, we're pretty much back to square one. For some reason, we see Flaminia, and she's literally 3 feet tall. Apparently, she had fake legs to help her be a spy, and this made me laugh so hard when I saw it because it's just such a stupid thing to put right at the end. Also, I love that they're totally friends now after she injected Bellary with a mysterious serum that knocked him out. Speaking of Bellary, he's decided he wants to travel the world on his own, realizing that he had an incredibly narrow view of the world up until now. So he runs off into the sunset without even saying goodbye to Naredo, but he does leave her Raraya's fish to take care of. This really put the capstone on me not liking Bell as a character. I'll just say I find him really annoying throughout the entire series. That, on top of being completely invincible in the G-Self, makes him one of the most boring protagonists that I think we've ever had. Oh, and finally, Klim learns that his dad, the president of Ameria, has been saying he was killed in action to rile up the population to fight again. So Klim gets really pissed and then crashes the Crescent ship into his dad while he's giving a speech, and it smashes through a bunch of buildings and definitely a bunch of people died, and I don't exactly get why the Space Noids would be okay with them using the Crescent ship in that way, but at the end of the day, I guess violence really did solve everything. Gundam Reconguista in G is definitely a weird entry into the Gundam franchise. It is the lowest rated Gundam TV series on my anime list, and honestly, I can see why. Personally, I think I would actually rank g-reco below Victory Gundam in how much I enjoyed it, and that unfortunately means it is my least favorite Gundam show. One very common criticism of Reconguista is that it is confusing and hard to follow, which is true. The way information is delivered fairly flippantly and the sheer volume of factions and character alliances make it more difficult to follow compared to a more run-of-the-mill series. For someone like me, who is binging the show instead of waiting weekly for it to release, and is taking notes on every episode, making an effort to understand what is happening, it's not so much that it's hard to follow, it's that the show just comes off feeling very shallow. Maybe if you just focused on the capital army, Ameria, and brought the Dorette fleet in at the halfway point and left it at that, you could have a really compelling storyline. But once you introduce the Towasangan resistance, multiple Dorette fleet squads fighting for glory, the JIT labs, Rosario 10, and the 10 police, well, it just gets so muddled that it's hard for all the pieces to fit together into a good story. Half of the characters are so one note in this show that I barely mention them in this review. Like, what the fuck am I supposed to say about Ringo? He's a prisoner that gets infatuated with Raraya and then just joins the megafauna for the rest of the show. That's it. No backstory, no character interaction with members of his former faction that he's now fighting to the death, just his character design. It's a shame, because this show's art, music, and design are all amazing. I know the style isn't for everyone, but the battles in this show have some great moments, and it has some of the wildest tech that I've ever seen in Gundam. For every piece of eye candy in this show, there is an inane conversation with 6 proper nouns that you don't know, and I can't blame any casual viewer for not being able to follow along with some of the weird Gundam-isms that Tomino is the obvious master of producing. Some would say that this is a war story that is about bad communication and the unwillingness to listen to anything but your own prejudices, and the way it is delivered is an intentional ploy by the writers to impart that confusion onto the audience. I would say that sounds like an interesting piece of art, but a very frustrating story. Hey everyone, welcome back to today's end card. I'm gonna not try to ramble for the whole thing, but here we go. We get to thank the channel members, aka Batosai, Brian Sanchez, D-Mel's, Daniel Johnson, Deader V, Dillasol22, Gert, Joe Castellanos, Joe Cavazos, John Lamb, Johnny G, Canto 20, McLean Nugent, Mr. Smash, Zappa Slave, Video Gamer 75, Trey Hardy's Industries, Harmonious, and Yo-Yo Mitch. Wow, a little impressed with myself on that one. Well, welcome to the end card where I talk about Reconguista and G, and just thinking about it is making me tired and want to go to sleep. So yeah, this was unfortunately probably my least favorite Gundam show I've seen. I didn't think anything would top Victory, but you know, here we are, I guess. I just didn't get it. The ultimate point of everything, the characters and the story, it all just felt very flat for me. So I think that's a pretty common opinion, and I bet I'll see that opinion reflected in the comments of this one. Of course, I'm sure this series has a lot of defenders as well because it's beautiful. Next we move on to, I believe, Gundam Build Fighters Try is next for the Gundam Retrospective, and then after that is Origin, and then we'll finally get to Iron Blooded Orphans. So before the summer is over, we will have IBO. And I know people have really been looking forward to that one, and I have too, because it's one of my favorite in the franchise. Besides that, though, next week we have Zoid's Chaotic Century coming out, and that show actually really impressed me. That was a really good one that I enjoyed. And then a couple other things before Gundam Build Fighters Try. So this summer, I know there's been a lot of gaps between videos. I guess I was just feeling a little burnt out, and just I had a really hard time focusing on just making stuff. But right now, summer has started. I'm feeling really good, and I've got a lot of work done. So I think we're gonna see a summer of content coming up, because I already have like multiple videos lined up for this channel, almost ready to go. So let's just say this is the start of the summer. I know it doesn't start till the 20th, but whatever. And we're gonna see a lot more videos more frequently than we have, because once a month is not the way to go, and it's not the way I want to do it. Also, there is going to be at some point a channel update coming out. I think I'm going to actually put the channel update on my gaming channel, and then just kind of like repost it here through a community update, so be on the lookout for that. We'll just be talking about what's going on both channels. Speaking of the gaming channel, it's a little dead right now because I've been recording a fuck ton of shit in the background, so that there will be like literally 300 videos coming out on that channel over the summer. So if you want to see some old school gaming stuff, keep a lookout for that update, because that's mostly what it's going to be about. Anyway, thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed. Please let me know down below how you felt about this episode, how you felt about Gundam g-reco, and if you're looking forward to the next couple of videos. See you then.